Hello listeners, from Roy Demarev in Sam. This week I'm going to be talking about a project which I'm involved with a Canadian and a Russian colleague on green cities. It is a reflection of an academic article which I have prepared and indeed published at one conference with Natasha Priadelina, my associate in the Ekaterinburg-based university devoted to forest engineering. And it's entitled A Russian City Goes Green. Now, I showed this to my friend and colleague in Toronto, Alan Bonner, with whom I've done some broadcasts with Radio 74, and he has recommended that we turn the academic article into a series of what I might call demotic articles, and he will syndicate them throughout newspapers and journals in North America and see who is interested in reading about the experiences of Ekaterinburg and therefore what might be learned as various cities in the world, not just to mention North America, improve their greenery or improve their greenness, whichever the noun is, from green. Well, when you think of attractive cities, great cities, perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is their topography. You might think of San Francisco's hills, Sydney's harbour, the canals in Venice and Amsterdam. But in addition, you might think of greenery. And then what might come to mind are the huge parks in New York and London, or the ravines in Toronto, or the palm trees in Los Angeles. And yet vegetation has got to be far more than just a tourist attraction, a means to make a city look beautiful. It has implications for human, mental and physical health. It might also be part of the solution to the current problems of flooding, overheating, pollution and soil erosion. And we've had that terrible example recently of soil erosion in California when the fire-struck area was then rained on so hard it produced this killing mudslide. Now, we've been studying, the three of us, have been studying Ekaterinburg. It's a large industrial city in Russia, and it has indeed taken on a project, the first in Russia, maybe not the world, to become green. Now, I just mentioned what Ekaterinburg is. It's the fourth largest city in Russia. There are two mega cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, and then there's Novosibirsk, and just behind Novosibirsk is Ekaterinburg, with a population of about 1.5 million. Now, Ekaterinburg is a major industrial and mining centre, and is a transport hub for the Trans-Siberian Railways. Now, its history is not always perfect. First of all, it's where the Tsars would send them through Ekaterinburg on the way to the gulags in Siberia. That was on foot in the Tsarist times, and of course the communists did the same, but presumably using trains or something to get there during the Soviet Union. Claims to history include the fact that Ekaterinburg was where the Bolsheviks executed the Tsar and his family. Later on, we have the more joyful experience of Boris Yeltsin being the regional governor. The region is called Sverdlovsk. The town was also called Sverdlovsk until its old name came back. And he had a major intervention, of course, at the end of the Soviet Union. The city itself sits abreast the Ural mountain, or mountains. It's a long chain coming down from the Arctic Ocean. It's not very high. You think of a city on a mountain being quite high, but it's only 245 meters above sea level, and it straddles Europe and Asia. In fact, it has much the same latitude as Aberdeen in Scotland or Copenhagen in Denmark, although because of the continental climate, the temperatures are much more extreme. Now, talking about the green spaces, we have two numbers which you might absorb into your head. One is that they have in Ekaterinburg 20 square meters per capita green space, for common use, that is, not counting private gardens. So that space includes parks, squares, boulevards. And then there are about 111 square meters per capita of forest parks, but we prefer the term when it's in the city of urban woodland. Now, both these ratios are inadequate. The World Health Organization recommends that the 20 square meters should be 50, and the 111 square meters of suburban forest should be 300 square meters. In fact, the WHO is a major source for our work. It's done much work on healthy cities, and that can be looked up easily enough on the net. It has a checklist, and in which it tells you about how you can have a sustainable ecosystem. That's explained in the WHO publications. And it insists that there should be citizen participation in improving the health of cities, and that the citizens, should be given access to the resources, the green spaces and the forests. Now, Ekaterinburg is not an ideal example of how to have a healthy city now. Compared with other world leaders in this field, it's well behind. It's not even on the top list. In fact, the leader in terms of the WHO measures is Hong Kong. That surprised me because I think of Hong Kong as a concrete jungle. After Hong Kong is Tokyo. That again, quite surprising for me. And then we have Copenhagen, Stockholm and Sydney, all of which are much more credible in terms of being rather obviously nice, green and healthy cities. Now, part of the problem in Ekaterinburg is the high number of vehicles. And Ekaterinburg, like many cities throughout Europe, has its trams and it's got modern buses, and it even has a metro. It's only got one line on the metro, but it is a metro. But they've still got enough cars and trucks to pollute the air. Now, part of the solution is greenery and making the city green. And so the city government has become a major project to support this green project. They brought in all sorts of specialists and environmentalists to achieve it. Now, the aim primarily is to expand and maintain the green space and use the cleansing properties of trees. Now, you may have heard the expression that trees are called the lungs of the planet. They have this major role, we all know it, of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and replacing it with oxygen. That's called photosynthesis. We all learnt that, in my case, in O-level biology. And I've got some hard data on this. Did you know that a medium-sized tree releases about 2 litres of oxygen in a day? And that is enough in one day to provide humans with enough oxygen for 3 days. Another hard datum, if you like, is that if you take a hectare of forest, it will absorb during the day about 150 to 170 litres of carbon dioxide and produce more oxygen, 180 to 200 litres. And that's enough oxygen to keep 200 people alive and breathing. So, you've got a relationship there. 100 hectares of forest will support 200 people in terms of oxygen. Now, it's not just photosynthesis that happens with trees. And there I learnt a great deal, and maybe my listeners will also learn a lot. It turns out that the leaves of many trees release something into the air which is called phytoncide. Now, phyton actually is not a term for a bacteria, it's for the leaf itself, or the bits of the leaf. But a phytoncide does in fact kill bacteria. And most trees give off these volatile and biologically active organic substances. They even form a kind of haze under a tree, and they can destroy pathogenic microbes and fungi and exert a huge influence on what we call multicellular organisms like insects and like mankind. They were, interestingly enough for me, discovered and their name coined by a Russian biochemist called Boris Tokhin. That was in 1928. Now, the best producer of these therapeutic volatile organic substances, called phytoncides, is actually pine. A pine forest, perhaps with some cedar in it, is so good at producing phytoncides that the air is practically sterile. So pine phytoncides increase the general constitution or the tone of a person in the forest breathing this air, and they they have, these phytoncides, a beneficial effect on the central and sympathetic, I think it's called, nervous system. Now, pine is not the only tree that produces phytoncides. We've got cypress, maple, viburnum, magnolia. Well, I won't bore you with the list, it's too long. Poplar's in there too, that's important. So phytoncides play an important role in plant immunity and in the interrelationships between the various organisms, and this has given rise to a whole new science. I had to learn another new word with this. It's called biogeosciences, and that is looking at the ecosystem of the entire world, characterized by the multiple interaction and the interlocking biological and physical processes. It's like geography in the physical sense and biology together. And this process, or this science of geoscience, is the study of local and global cycles of carbon, nitrogen, water, and energy. Now, Russia certainly has its forests. In fact, boreal, which just means northern in this context, trees grow in what they call the taiga, and you can think of a boreal ring round the Earth going right through Russia, which is, of course, enormous, and across Canada and picking up Alaska on the way. It stretches round the globe at the top end of the globe before the Arctic Circle. Now, these forests, these boreal forests, are huge resources for their countries and for the world as a whole. Nevertheless, population density and the pollution that we are creating means cities need trees within the city, not just in green belts or far away in boreal forests. We need parks, trails, and city woodland. You might ask, what trees? Well, we'll mention a couple of tree types, if you like, or species. Pine I've already mentioned. We should throw in larch, spruce, and silver birch, and poplar. Well, there are more, but I won't bore you with the list. In fact, the linden tree has to nevertheless be mentioned because it's almost mythological in Russian culture, and you do find linden parks in most cities in Russia. Now, most of these species are fairly resistant to atmospheric pollution, but I have to mention that ash, linden, which I just mentioned, and spruce, unfortunately, are rather intolerant of dust. And in fact, there is a lot of dust in our cities and in Ekaterinburg. So planting the trees in the city is the easy bit about making steps towards greening a city. In the very next article, which I hope you will hear next week, I'm going to mention how the dust of a city is partly absorbed by trees. There's a lot to learn in this, and if you are listening to these programs, do tune in each week because they will build up a total picture, and I will keep the recordings, of course, just in case they're ever useful one fine day. Speak to you again next week as we continue this discussion.